So if you don't want to be on YouTube, please turn your camera off now. And as well, if you could keep your microphone muted, just so that we can avoid background noise. We've got quite a large group. And with that, we are at 8 o'clock, so I am going to get tonight started. My name is Ruth Kaplis. I'm the National Content and Media Relations Manager here at JDRF. And on behalf of everybody at JDRF, I'd like to welcome you to our Let's Talk T1D educational series. We're very excited to present you tonight with more information on the latest T1D research. Our speaker, Dr. Anne-Marie McDonald, will have about 30 to 40 minutes for her discussion, and then we will open it up to your questions. If you could please use the chat function and put your questions there, we'll try to get to as many of them as we can, time permitting. If this is your first time, welcome. If you've been here before, welcome back. JDRF is a global leader working towards an end to type 1 diabetes through research, funding, and advocacy. JDRF also supports people and families in the T1D community from the time of diagnosis by helping those living with T1D to have better, healthier, and safer lives while we work to find cures. As visitors on this land, I would like to begin by respectfully acknowledging that the JDRF Canada National Support Office is located on the traditional lands of the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabe, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat people. Tonight's education series is about the latest research updates. Next month, we will be presenting a webinar all about clinical trials. We hope you'll join us then as well. We also host a virtual connection series on the fourth Wednesday of every month. This is an unstructured opportunity to connect with others within the T1D community with no formal programming. And the next one will be Wednesday, February 28th at 12 p.m. Pacific time and 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. So I'm very excited to introduce you to our speaker. Please help me welcome Dr. Anne-Marie McDonald, JDRF's National Manager, Research Programs and Communications. Dr. McDonald is a passionate medical and wellness expert with a deep interest in advanced medical knowledge in rehabilitation, diabetes, exercise medicine, and preventative medicine. She is a healthy, active living advocate who supports a healthcare system that fosters patient engagement, patient empowerment, and chronic disease self-management. She lives with T1D herself and is the mother of 2 young children. And with that, I would like to turn it over to you, Anne.
Thank you, Ruth. Hi, everyone. I hope you're having a good day and a good evening. I'm coming to you from Oakville, from outside of Toronto. So if there's anyone in Ontario, hello to you. We have quite a packed presentation for you tonight. We wanted to give you some updates about some of the different research programs that we're funding, especially in kind of new areas that we don't often, or I shouldn't say haven't historically funded in, like mental health or screening. And I'm also going to talk to you about some of the, some of our portfolios when it comes to stem cell work, where there's a lot of exciting work, as well as in disease modifying therapy. So looking at how can we stop type 1 before it actually happens. Like Ruth said, I live myself with type 1 and have for about 35 years. So I've kind of seen the progression historically of research in Canada and globally. And I honestly think that right now we're in a really exciting time. I'm not going to tell you that there's going to be a cure in 5 years. I've heard that for decades. But what I will tell you is that I think there's a ton of collaboration among researchers and a lot of really, really positive, innovative results that are coming out of the research space. So it is quite positive. For those of you who aren't aware, we really are a global leader when it comes to type 1 research. Our vision is to have a world without type 1 diabetes. And how do we do that, right? We look at ways to support research that will develop a potential cure, but also ways to prevent and treat type 1, knowing that it is a 24/7 disease, as well as looking at ways to treat its complications, right? There's, of course, the risk of complications if you have very high blood sugars for many years, for a long period of time. We fund over 50 grants. I believe last time I checked, it was about 55, 56 research grants in Canada. We have about 15 clinical trials that are being supported. And last year, we were really thrilled to be able to give over $10 million to research in Canada in the 12 months. There's, an interesting and, slightly disturbing trend right now in Canada that we see of T1D incidence that's going up. So the rate of new cases is around 4%, which is significantly higher than our affiliates in other countries. So JDRF is based out of the US, you might know, out of New York, but we do have affiliate offices in the UK, Australia, the Netherlands, and in Israel. We don't really know why it's higher in Canada. And so some of the work that I'll be describing to you and some of the grants that we're funding are specifically looking at that, looking at ways to screen and understand better why certain individuals and why, geographically speaking, we are at higher risk in Canada to develop the disease. There's a great index, T1D index, that came out, I want to say 2022. That was right before I went on my second mat leave. Really phenomenal data and work that is public. If you're interested in things like that, I would take a look at it. It's a global T1D index. If you Google it, I think it'll come up right away. In terms of our strategy, so how do we decide what we fund? So we look at both funding cures and improving lives projects. About 70% of our funding goes towards cures research. So that could be in screening, like I said, looking at stopping the disease before it actually happens. Disease modifying therapy, which is just as it sounds, how do we change or modify type 1 before it progresses, for example, and I'll share some interesting and exciting work in that domain. Cell therapy, so knowing that at its core, type 1 diabetes is an endocrine disease, so a disease of a lack of a hormone, right? The hormone is produced by the beta cells of the pancreas. Can we somehow get beta cells either functioning again? Can we transplant beta cells back into the body? How can we actually make them happy and healthy and able to produce insulin continuously without the immune system kind of interfering in that functionality? And then lastly, improving lives. So, this is kind of a newer element, a newer part of our strategy, recognizing that type 1 is a 24/7 disease. And as we're working towards cures, people are living with this. I'm living with this. Many of you, your children are living with this every single day. So can we support programs that look at mental health, that look at exercise, that look at treating complications or devices, right, that can improve lives? Throughout everything that we study, we also keep an eye to capacity building and training of researchers and clinicians, and also at psychosocial outcomes. Again, looking at the fact that type 1 diabetes can be quite burdensome. Can we support the mental health of individuals living with type 1 in Canada at the same time? Like I said, in the last few years, we've really seen a great deal of partnerships and collaborations and advancements when it comes to type 1 diabetes research. A few that I wanted to highlight are marked here. 5 years in science is a quite short amount of time. Science does move and research does move fairly slowly. So to see all of these, advancements, I think kind of speaks to, like I said, the type 1 diabetes research landscape right now in Canada. We're funding right now a general screening program of $12 million in partnership with CIHR, with the Federal Institute of Health Research. We are also right now seeing many trials of these disease-modifying therapies. Like I said, there are drugs now that can actually delay type 1 diabetes. So you might be at high risk and you might be able to take something and then it'll delay and lower your risk, for example, of having DKA or diabetic ketoacidosis. So really promising work there. The third line is looking at ways to have new clinical trials. It really is in the last 5 to 10 years that we're seeing more and more collaboration partnerships between pharma companies, between bioengineering labs, for example, and academic researchers driving this forward with trials that now have human participants, clinical trials, right, that are exploring this therapy. And I'll go into a few later on tonight. Mental health, we had no strategy for T1D and mental health 5 years ago. In the last 3 years, we've developed a strategy. We've developed and put out a training program specifically for healthcare professionals in Canada. If you have tried to access mental health resources. You might have found it to be very difficult when it comes to specifically type 1 diabetes. A lot of practitioners don't have that experience, and so we're training them now to make sure that they feel able and confident to help individuals living with type 1. And we're also funding a lot of other mental health projects, looking at peer support, looking at ways to help women who are pregnant, helping with exercise and youth who might be disadvantaged. Lots of really great work. And then lastly, advocacy, even though it's kind of separate to research, really is important for us to make sure that individuals with type 1 have coverage for these expensive devices that could help them live more easily, right, with the condition. And we have a few hybrid systems now. So hybrid, looking at when the pump and the CGM, the continuous glucose monitor, speak to one another. There are two in Canada. There's Tandem and Medtronic that have one. You may have heard that the Omnipod in the US has been approved and is in use. Canada, we're still waiting on it. I'm sure some of you have questions about when it will come to Canada. We don't yet know, but when we know, we will share, because I'm on the Omnipod now, and I would love to know when it's coming to Canada. In terms of screening, so I think it's important to share a little bit of background on screening. Many people don't know that we can actually screen for type 1 diabetes. And that's why we put all this support behind this program, like I said, this project last summer of $12 million. Can we actually screen for type 1? So you can screen for type 1 before it actually occurs. You can screen for family members. TrialNet in the US allows for that. If you live with type 1, a family member can be screened. And you can either check for autoantibodies against T1D. You can look at combining autoantibodies and glucose levels. So if you find yourself in the second stage, which is right before stage 3. Stage 3 is classically what you would consider a type 1 diabetes diagnosis. So when someone, comes in with, really being thirsty and, having accidents in bed, or, peeing a lot, going to the bathroom a lot, losing a lot of weight, right? High blood sugars, that's stage 3. That's, they've kind of developed, unfortunately, true type 1 diabetes. But can we intervene before that? And we can. But we have to know who is actually in that state, right? So who has the autoantibodies, who has the abnormal blood sugars, and those individuals could have access to some of these disease-modifying drugs that I'll talk about in a second. So, like I said, we can do a simple blood test. We can see who has the autoantibodies against type 1. We can look at genetic risk scores as well. The idea of screening might be foreign to you or new to you, mainly because, it is something that would stop type 1 before it happens. But in many cases, it might be the best route when it comes to curing this disease. If we look at, what it can do, if we could screen individuals from birth, we could actually prevent DKA or diabetic ketoacidosis from happening. And that's when, your body ultimately has such high blood sugars that it starts utilizing fat and muscle and other parts of your body for energy, and you can be quite sick with the circulating ketones, right? So if we can prevent that, that would be a huge win for the type 1 diabetes community. Can we also consider enrolling participants in trials to accelerate prevention research, right? If we're able to screen individuals, we have more people that could benefit from some of these drugs that have shown really great results that I'll share with you in the next couple slides. And then, like I said, can we consider a therapy if we do have an option, right? You don't want to screen if you don't have, a next step, right? If we screen for type 1, what does that mean? What can we offer the individual or the family? And there are some drugs now that are coming out on the market that can actually delay or prevent what we call clinical T1D. So when you actually need to start using insulin kind of out of that honeymoon period where you might not have to. The big grant that I said was funded last summer in July. And just hear my echo. And I think someone joined. If you just want to mute your mic, perfect. It's funded with CIHR, and it's called Can Screen T1D. And the idea is to have universal childhood T1D screening in Canada. It's a fantastic and collaborative group of individuals, researchers, endocrinologists, public health experts. There's also a patient advisory group. We're very conscious of the need to have a patient perspective in almost all, if not all, of our research programs that we fund. It's called a consortium, so it really is a large gathering of people and minds and expertise that will work across 4 or 5 years on these 10 different programs, 9 research programs, as well as a pilot program, to really understand, can we screen the general population for type 1? What does that mean for the families? What does that mean for the clinicians? How does it look? And then what ultimately, like I said, what can we offer those participants who might be at higher risk of developing type 1? The drugs that we could offer are called disease-modifying therapies, and this is kind of one of our buckets of research that we fund. As the name implies, and as I've mentioned, this is about kind of modifying, changing, altering the course of a disease. Not everyone will be diagnosed with type 1 in the same way. You probably know just from speaking with others that, your diagnosis story probably looked quite different than someone else's. And what that means is that the cells and the immune system, as they're unfortunately stopping to work, right, can potentially be influenced and affected by different medications kind of along that pathway. From the pathophysiology, the pathway from healthy beta cells that make insulin to ones that don't. A really key study and results that were just shared, this was in the beginning of December, so it's about, I guess now, almost 2 months ago. This was based in Australia. It's a disease-modifying therapy called baricitinib. It's a drug that has already been approved for other diseases, and as soon as we can use medications that have been approved for other diseases, it makes it a lot easier, right, for our trials. It's a drug that quiets the immune system. So in some ways, it lets your body have your beta cells be functioning for longer. They had participants that were fairly new to diagnosis, so within about 3 months or 100 days. And they looked at C-peptide levels. C-peptide is basically a little piece of the insulin molecule that gets cut off when it's made. If you think of a little manufacturing plant, the C-peptide, let's say, falls in a bucket, you can measure the C-peptide, and it'll tell us whether or not insulin is being made. And they also looked at HbA1c. And what they found, if I can just direct your attention to the graph on the right, is we're looking here at the timeline on the bottom, so weeks of the medication. And on the top, we're looking at how much C-peptide was made. This is a pill that was taken once daily. The yellow line is the actual medication, the baricitinib. The gray line is the placebo. So those are participants who are part of a trial who, they don't know, but they just receive a water pill, if you will. And what you can see is that the level of insulin or C-peptide in the kind of yellowy orange example is fairly straight, meaning that over time, and this is a fairly lengthy study, it's they shared the results at 48 weeks, so and 4 years, is that the level stayed fairly consistent, right? So the insulin production wasn't decreasing as quickly as you would expect in someone who was at high risk of developing type 1. So the beta cells were preserved, they were protected in some way by this drug. And it's really positive news. It doesn't mean that, this can be given, tomorrow to someone. It's still a clinical trial. They're going to continue looking at what happens after the 48 weeks. But it does give us hope that there is a way to prolong this honeymoon period where, insulin is either not required or very little insulin is required. And it also, gives us time to better understand what the cells are doing, what the immune system is doing during this time before you're kind of in, full blown, if you will, type 1, where you really have to take insulin. Here, I just want to draw your attention to the 3 graphs. You don't have to worry about the words. We will be sharing a PDF of the slides after the presentation. So if you're, writing notes, you can feel free to write notes, but we will be sharing them. I just want to show you, so on the left is the drug that I just mentioned. So that's the latest study out of Australia. In the middle and on the right are 2 other drugs. You may have heard of Tzield or teplizumab, which is the American, the drug that the FDA approved last year, the year prior, 2020, 2. We have October 2023. The study, I think, came out the year prior, but it was approved by the FDA recently. You can see that with teplizumab, and similarly here, you're looking at time on the bottom on the straight axis, and then C-peptide or insulin going up. The black line goes slightly down. It's still higher than the placebo, meaning that the cells were protected and insulin was being produced more so than when nothing was given. But it's actually not as straight as this baricitinib on the left. And then another drug on the right, kind of same idea, quiets the immune system, allows the cells to function a little bit better, produce insulin for a little longer. Was kind of steady initially, right? So we're looking at the orange line on the right. But compared to the placebo was quite a lot better, right? The level of insulin at that one was 52 weeks, was quite a bit higher than the water pill. So really, I think, important work that is being done. And it kind of speaks to this idea that if we can target the immune system early on, can we learn about why beta cells stop functioning? Can we learn about what they need to produce insulin again? And that could potentially be translated to someone, like myself. I've had type 1 for 35 years, right? So can that be translated to someone where there might still be some beta cells? Because we do know that individuals who've lived with type 1 for a long time have a very varied amount of beta cells. Some are kind of, quiet or sleeping. I think I've read in some publications, they talk about this idea of sleeping beta cells. But can we kind of transfer some of this knowledge perhaps also to people who are not only just in that high risk category, but are further down the line many years from diagnosis? So really, really interesting work. Next, I'm going to talk about cell therapies. And, some of you might have heard of, different stem cell therapies. In Canada, we're quite known for the Edmonton protocol, which is Dr. James Shapiro's work out of Edmonton. He's still working with his team, looking at different ways to transplant cells, islet cells, into individuals with type 1 diabetes. He's also looking at ways, and I believe I have it on a later slide, but looking at ways to use your self as a source of cells, if you will. So using blood cells that come from your own body. And, the challenge is always to figure out, how do we evade the immune system, right? How do we have this beta cell, grouping or nest that we transplant or that we grow and put in our body that will then be able to produce insulin without getting attacked once again by the immune system. We fund about 14, 15 grants with many teams across Canada who are specifically focused on islet cell work and stem cell work. This idea of immune cloaking, like I just said, how do we protect the cells? There's some great work out of the University of Toronto with Dr. Sefton. They're looking at, making a little barrier with kind of biomaterials. They're a kind of regeneration group of experts. How can we almost use 3D printing, right? Like, how can we use all this great technology that we have to build something to protect the beta cells? So almost science fiction work, but it is happening, and it is very I think exciting for the type 1 diabetes community. When it comes to stem cells, other than the transplantation, so Dr. Shapiro in Edmonton really works on kind of the transplant idea or process, right, of beta cells. There are two companies, ViaCyte, if you know Latin, kind of means, through a cell, right? So we're looking at cell therapy specifically. ViaCyte is one company. The second is Vertex. They now have joined efforts. I'll talk about Vertex next. ViaCyte has a product where it is derived from stem cells, and it does have a little device that protects it. You can kind of see the little red markings in the top right corner. Those are the blood vessels, right? Because we know that the beta cells, if you think of your body, right, if you're someone that does not live with type 1, maybe your child or your family member does, you have your blood delivering nutrients, right, constantly to the pancreas and to the beta cells. So if beta cells are transplanted into a body, they do need to have protection from the immune system, but they also need to have access to the circulation and access to the blood vessels. So those are the little blood vessels that are able to kind of go into the go into the device. It still requires immunosuppression. So immunosuppression is when you have to take a drug to lower your immune system, to make your immune system a little bit quieter, kind of put them down for a nap, the immune cells, right, so that they don't attack the beta cells. It does come with, certain side effects. You can, find yourself falling ill more often. You have to be more careful, right, during certain times of year. But for certain individuals with type 1, if you have complications, if you find that you have, tremendous low blood sugars, or you have very resistant and difficult to treat type 1 diabetes, it might actually easier and better for you to take an immunosuppression drug than kind of, manage and deal with all of the other kind of complexities that come with living with type 1. The latest results here were quite positive in terms of the insulin production. You can see at 6 months, many of them were making insulin. The challenge, though, remains that not all of the cells were making insulin. So still fairly new results. The first results, I believe, I did have it marked here, were published in late 2021. And research does move fairly slowly, and this is quite a complex trial with many many steps to the process. A really interesting documentary was made about this clinical trial called the Human Trial. You may have heard about it. It was about 2 years ago or a year and a half ago that I would recommend you check out. I don't know now, Ruth might know. I don't know if it's public right now or if you do have to pay for it still, but really interesting documentary if you want to learn more about this trial. And then Vertex is the other company. Now, Vertex is a company based out of the US. They're a big pharma company. They don't deal primarily in type 1 diabetes. They also focus on work for, why am I blanking? Sickle cell anemia, cystic fibrosis. Like they really work across the board when it comes to treatments. They acquired, if you know the company Sema Therapeutics. They acquired Sema back in, I believe, 2019, which was an islet cell specific company founded by Dr. Douglas Melton out of Boston. And they have 2 products. The first product also requires immunosuppression. They had tremendous results shared fairly recently, about in the last 12 to 18 months, that all 14 of their patients who were dosed with this islet cell engraftment just meaning, the transplanted cells, produced insulin, which was phenomenal. And none of them required exogenous insulin. So none of them needed insulin from outside their body, whether through pump or injection, which is really great. It also had a really good safety profile, meaning that there weren't really any bad side effects from the treatment. Unfortunately, we just found out a few weeks ago that 2 of the 14 patients have passed away. The deaths have been unrelated to the treatment. Vertex hasn't shared too much about it just yet, but they are doing a review. For any of the new patients who are participants who are part of the study but who have not yet been dosed or given the treatment, their treatment is paused until we have some more information. But I'm hopeful that whatever it is that they share, they'll be able to say it is truly unrelated to the treatment, and the 2 patients have passed because of different reasons. Their other product is one that has a device, and you would not need the immunosuppression, which would in some ways be better, right? Because then you could potentially have the cells that are making insulin and not need to take these drugs to suppress your immune system. It's fairly new, so they have the first part that's done. They're still working on preparing for the second part. So I'm really curious to see what they will find. And I think when it comes to stem cell therapies, the immunosuppression bit is fairly, it's a consideration that many people do have to think about, right? Like, would they rather come off insulin and take an immunosuppressive drug, or ideally, like with the the bottom product, the VX264, could we think about a time where you could take a device, a treatment that has the beta cells, that's protected, and that will actually keep producing insulin? I think that's more the dream or the goal, right? So that's Vertex. And when we hear anything, we'll be sure to share it, whether on the blog or in a future Let's Talk event. A few other promising updates, and I've just highlighted a few here. One about microvessels. So I've talked about kind of the need for the beta cells to be happy and healthy and produce insulin. They need blood access to the blood system. They need access to nutrients. So some of our researchers are working on that. Some researchers are working on gene expression. So looking at, is there a way that we can actually help the stem cells use their genes to produce, proteins, to make an environment where more insulin can be made, where the immune system perhaps won't interfere as much. Can we look at ways to make a product that is derived from a person's own tissues, right? So that's Dr. James Shapiro working on cells that could be produced from an individual's blood cells. So it wouldn't be from a donor, but it would be from your own cells. So perhaps that's a better route to take. We have a tremendous center at UBC that we've been funding for a few years now, where we have a group of dedicated islet cell researchers working on everything from, building a better beta cell, building a better kind of covering, right, or coat for the beta cells to be protected, looking at ways to minimize stress, right? So often the immune system attacks the cells and creates this stressful environment for the body, which then leads to further beta cell death and lower insulin levels. So really, really interesting work. If you're interested in cell therapies and islet cell work, take a look at the JRF Center of Excellence at UBC. And then lastly, training. We have quite a few trainees that we support. It's very important for us, like I mentioned at the start when I was talking about our strategy, to make sure that we have the capacity in Canada of researchers, not only those that are well established and been in the field for decades, but also, the new clinicians, the new academics who want to enter this field and share their expertise and time in T1D research. A little bit about precision medicine, and then clinical trials, and then I'll make sure I have time for discussion and questions. So another kind of grouping of grants that we fund is based around precision medicine, and it's really, kind of as you would expect, it means precise medicine, right? Rather than a one-size-fits-all, can we think about ways to really have treatments and drugs that are super specific for you, right? So like, something that would be applicable for me would perhaps not be applicable for you or for your child or for whoever lives with type 1. It might be because of our genetics, because of our environment, because of our microbiome, right? Our intestine, we know there's a lot of interaction between the microbiome and the immune system. Can we look at a way to formulate, create a treatment that is right for that person at the right time? So again, maybe the treatment looks different at the start of your disease where you have disease modifying therapies. Maybe it looks different kind of when you still have, half your beta cells. What does that look like? And what can we do in that research space to make sure that we're really developing treatments and cures that are specific to you? Because of course we're all quite different, right? Even though insulin helps us, we're all quite different. So some of the projects that we're funding in precision medicine, these are co-funded with our partner with the CIHR, once again, the Federal Institute of Health Research. And we have some work looking at AIs, looking at artificial intelligence. Can we pull from data sets? Can we use computers to help us gain knowledge about clinical diabetes, genetics, lifestyle, quality of life, all different things that are gathered on everybody's, clinical visits, right? Can we use that data in an anonymous way to help individuals with type 1? Can we look at empowering diverse youth? We know that there's a huge population of individuals who might have a diverse background or not be as represented in research. Can we look at ways to help them develop treatments that will be better specifically for them? Also looking at the biological sex of beta cells for precision medicine, which I find really interesting. Like, can we actually look at the difference in males and females and see if we can cater the treatment specifically for their beta cells? Is there a difference? What will we find? And then lastly, looking at individual differences in beta cells. So there's this notion that you might actually not all beta cells are the same. Maybe there's some that are kind of, queen bees or leaders who, share proteins or genetics or messages, right, with others. what can we learn in that space to make sure at the end of the day that these beta cells stay happy, that they're strong, that they're able to make insulin. So really great work in precision medicine, fairly new grants, so you're not going to see results just yet. Probably in a year or so, we'll have more to share. And then lastly, just a couple slides on clinical trials. Everything that I've shared, of course, wouldn't ever reach any of us, any of your family members who live with type 1, if we didn't have clinical trials. So I think often we think about clinical trials in terms of experimental drugs or treatments like Vertex or ViaCyte with the stem cell therapies, but they're equally, if not more important for all different treatments and drugs and therapies, right? So they're important for behavioral trials. We have some that we fund in exercise, in peer support, in mental health, in virtual care, especially through COVID. We found that many individuals with type 1 were no longer going into clinic and they needed that extra support. So we're funding some work in that space. We're funding work in device trials, of course, so looking at ways either through insulin pumps, through CGMs, how can we have pumps that really help us and CGMs that really help us with our quality of life and lowering complications, drug trials, procedural trials. There's really a good mix in Canada of clinical trials, and I think that kind of speaks to our history and our place in the T1D research landscape. On the right, if you're interested, we just launched, I believe now about 2 weeks ago, a new clinical trials finder tool. It's relatively easy to find, jdrf.ca/research/clinical trials. And we also have a video that we put out last year about it. Take a look. I think I have a slide. I do. Take a look at it if you're interested in finding out more about the trials that exist in Canada, whether you're eligible, whether it's something that, often if there is travel involved, travel would be covered, the cost of travel would be covered. I said, you have the spectrum, right? You'll have some trials that involve the stem cells that might seem more experimental to you, but then you'll also have the trials that will involve you from home, looking through an app to support mental health and living with type 1. So I would definitely recommend that you take a look at it, sign up if it's something that speaks to you, and check back often, or you can even sign up for alerts. So anytime there's a new trial that's published, you'll have a notification. You'll get an email. So what's next? So I shared a lot. I know I went through quite a lot of information in a short amount of time. I think that as someone who's lived with type 1 for a while, I speak personally that I do think we're in a very exciting time now. I can see how much collaboration there is amongst researchers. Canada is very proud, and I think especially with the discovery of insulin, we're very proud of our history when it comes to type 1 diabetes, right? And the research around finding a cure. We have shifted to also focusing on improving lives, right? Recognizing that research does move slow. But as you saw today, like we have some really good candidates when it comes to bettering life with this condition, whether that's through disease-modifying therapies and preventing type 1 from even happening, right? If we can have a general population screen, like we do for some other diseases, maybe young kids won't develop the disease, or if anything, we can start off with delaying the progression. So if you or your child was diagnosed, at 2 years of age, imagine the difference if that child could be diagnosed at 5 or at 6 years of age, right? It's a huge burden that's lifted from both the parents and from the child. Really great work in stem cell therapies, clinical trials with people who've come off insulin. Again, fairly new, we have a couple of years of data. The one that does not require the immune suppression drugs is even newer, right? So we're trying really to support these key players in the field. And then lastly, when it comes to precision medicine, I think we're looking at ways now. We have so much information at our fingertips when it comes to AI and computers, and looking at using all of that data to make sure that the treatment that your endocrinologist, that your family doctor is giving you or your child is really specific to you, right? Like that would be if we can't yet cure type 1, can we find treatment that is incredibly specific to you, so that life with type 1 would be a lot better, and your quality of life and those of your loved ones would be better. So I'm going to leave you there. I could keep going, but I'm going to stop. I'm going to leave you there, and I'm going to close my screen so I can see you. Oops. I think now I'm sharing still. Where is everybody? There we go.
Yeah, we can. There we go.
There we go.
So there was one question from Teresa earlier just about TZIELD and Health Canada. I wasn't sure if there was any updated information on that or not.
I don't think I have any updated information on TZIELD right now. In the US, I believe it's for 8+, so if you're 8 years of age or older. I was quite surprised to find out just recently that many of the insurers in the US have been covering the cost. Sorry, I just see messages come up. But no, I don't have an update right now on TZIELD.
I think it was going to the European Union for approval next, prior to Health Canada.
Prior to Health Canada. Yeah, generally speaking, if we see FDA, we see then, yes, the European regulatory offices will, explore the different drugs, and then Canada. Part of it, unfortunately, is because we are a smaller population, so the market share for these companies is quite a bit smaller, so they push often in the larger kind of to go to market in the larger populations first, which is unfortunate. But
Barry was just mentioning the CRISPR partnership with Vertex. We do have some information about that on our website as well, so I can put that blog link in the chat. Do we know if VX264 is still recruiting? I feel like no.
I don't know if they are. It would be, though, if you go to the clinical trials tool, it would be updated with their most recent eligibility and whether or not they're recruiting right now. For CRISPR, just a word if you're not familiar. So CRISPR is a gene editing technology that Vertex and ViaCyte work with in terms of looking at ways to make a cell therapy that would not require immunosuppression. There was some news just in the last couple of weeks about CRISPR and ViaCyte and Vertex kind of changing their relationship, but there's still that gene editing technology at its core is still going to be used by Vertex in their trials.
I see that someone has their hand up, and let me see if I can figure out who that person is. Oh, Brad. Hi, Brad. I think you've already unmuted yourself. Did you want to just ask your question?
Sure. Brad White from Calgary. Question for Dr. McDonald. There's another study going on at Alberta Diabetes Foundation. Dr. Batu, and I'm probably going to mispronounce that, is looking at a oral drug called tolomidone. And they have proceeded to acquire rights through a company through the U of A. And I'm wondering if you're aware of that study.
Yes, I'm aware of the study. I have to say I'm a few weeks back from mat leave, so I'm aware of it. I need to go back and read more about it, but I'm happy to. And then I can, if you want any more information, I can send it to you. They're doing great work there, and I don't know the specifics of that one study right now, but I have heard of it.
Okay. And second question, if I could, regarding looping. I know we have all these other companies that are Health Canada approved, and we have a company DIY looping algorithm that I actually wrote for my granddaughter who's 4 years old.
That's great.
And what we've done is we've rolled it over actually to BC Diabetes, and they're managing that looping now. Again, under the radar, and I'm wondering where JDRF comes into play, advocating on behalf of type 1 diabetes people that with Health Canada get this approved, and so we can fly instead of under the radar, above the radar.
Above the radar. Yes, that's a great question. Thank you, Brad. And that's great that you set that up for, I have to say, I have tried to set up my systems with looping, and it's just very difficult. So maybe I should message you. I have a hard time with algorithms and all of that. But I think so. JRF definitely supports the options, right, when it comes to technology. I think because it's, like you said, unfortunately, it's still under the radar. What we can support are researchers who are looking at ways to either use algorithms, or actually are some hybrid closed loop systems that we're funding. There's some work out of McGill where they're looking at, it's pretty interesting, looking at ways to have these preset meals, so your pump actually knows how to work without you inputting any of the carb information. And when it comes to Health Canada, we actually have regular workshops with Health Canada, and there's one that's upcoming, and it's, our goal is really to educate and discuss some of these new technologies, and we have one on closed loop coming up in the next few months. So it's not only on our radar, it's definitely something that, we know the community is using, and I think if we could make it more accessible, right, for individuals, if we could raise awareness about it, then I think for sure more people could use it.
I mean, and just for your information, the doctor leading the looping and Night Scout is Dr. Tom Elliott from BCI.
Yes, I'm familiar.
Yeah. I congratulate him, and there's 100 people on this call, but I congratulate him in the sense that he's taken the risk to run this. And I think we need more people like him that kind of look at Health Canada being a bit behind the times. And I understand they have a myriad of things they have to, dot the I's and cross the T's, so to speak. But I think, for people on this call, I think it's a really important asset. And we talk about, you had a graph that talks about improving lives, which was secondary to the research. In fact, if you invert that a little bit in a pyramid, research will go on, and I think it's absolutely important. But right now, it's important to improve the lives of those that have type 1 diabetes. And so your graph is great, but I would invert it a little bit. So anyway, that's
No, those are great comments, and I think it speaks to a little bit. I wouldn't call it a rebrand, but what happened was we were solely focused, JRF, on research and on research for cures. But it is, as soon as you have the immune system at play, like, it is super complex, right? So this idea that, we're only going to fund cure research when people, like, to your point, Brad, people are living with us 24/7, right? Can we improve their lives and the quality of life? Tom Elliott is phenomenal. And he even shares, like, you don't have to be a patient of his at his clinic. He will share all of the, like, I've gone through his website, and with, like I said, with the algorithms, he's a great resource for everyone in Canada.
Stefan, did you want to unmute yourself? I see you had your hand up. There you go. If you're speaking, we can't hear you, so you may want to put it in the chat.
No.
Well, hopefully Stefan will put the question in the chat. Unfortunately, I see your mic is unmuted, but if you're speaking, none of us can hear you. While we wait, were there any other questions?
I just saw a question about the Omnipod pop up. I can answer that, Ruth. We don't know when the Omnipod 5 will come to Canada. We know it's approved. So the Omnipod 5, for those of you who aren't aware, Omnipod is a tubeless pump that you wear for 3 days. And in the US, they have one now that is paired with the Dexcom, and will, in a way, use the algorithms, right, to help you with looping. It's not, or looping with kind of a hybrid closed loop system. It's not yet available in Canada. Health Canada is aware of it, but will not give us any dates. So we don't know where it is along that kind of pathway from acceptance to actually being in market in Canada.
We find out at the same time as everybody else.
Yeah.
So same answer to you, Fareed. We will find out about the Libre 3 at the same time that you do. We don't have any inside track information on when anything is approved by Health Canada. That's including TZIELD or any of the drugs that may be approved in other markets. I do know the regulatory process is very rigid and detailed. We had a presentation on biosimilar insulins last year with representatives from Health Canada, and it's a very rigorous regulatory process, so it does take time, but we never know before the general public does. We're not privy to any of that information, unfortunately, so we can't answer any of those questions. I think it might still be Stefan with the hand up. Oh, okay. Just in chat. She just said,
I think it's about looping.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think that may be potentially an education series we may need to do in the future, because I know there's a lot of interest in it, and perhaps this doctor in Calgary might be willing to work with us on one. So that's
in
something.
BC, Tom
Elliott,
he's
so
great.
that's something that we can look into, seeing if Dr. Elliott might be willing to present with us. We can reach out and ask for a future session.
Yeah, it's a great idea.
I have one question, if you don't mind.
Yes.
I'm just curious if anyone's working on having a CGM and pump as one unit.
As one unit. So are you thinking in terms of, I think the challenge would be with the actual insertion. If there is one.
I know it's in tandem, it's a separate device, but it's all one system.
It's one system. Yeah, I think the challenge is that if you think of the actual insertion of where the insulin comes in, right? You almost need 2 points. You need one that measures the interstitial fluid. That's how the CGMs work, right? Looking at the glucose levels that are kind of in that little cell space under the skin. And then you need one to actually access the insulin. So I haven't come across any. I think that was Susan, right, that asked. But that would be nice. If we had that would be nice. Brad?
Hi. Sorry if I'm taking up too much airtime, you can let me know.
No.
With regards, and I do a lot of research on this, so that's probably why I chime in a bit. Vertex, very interesting company and doing a lot of work, and of course they have a lot of money to drive their research. They are building, my understanding, a factory in Portsmouth, New Hampshire. That is lead up to their, of course, clinical trial approvals, which, I love optimism. And so are you aware of any further updates on where they're at as far as their clinical trials with non-immunosuppression drugs? I forget the name of the trial number. You spoke to it earlier.
But, the VX-880 and So unfortunately, I don't have too many details. I kind of alluded to it a little bit when it came to the CRISPR and ViaCyte and Vertex news that just came out. I don't know, Brad, if you came across that, but it looks like, so ViaCyte was the cell therapy technology. They were partnering with CRISPR, and then Vertex was using that kind of, knowledge and that, let's say, technology to produce these gene edited cells. It seems like now, and this was just in the last, I think, week or so, when they said that they're, in a way, cutting ties with the ViaCyte CRISPR cell, it begs the question, will Vertex, and to your point, Brad, now that they've had this facility, is Vertex planning on having like their own Vertex cells, right? I don't know. I listened in on the Vertex shareholders call. They had a health conference, I think 2 weeks ago, and they didn't really speak to it. They just said that, type 1 diabetes is still very much a priority for them and finding therapies for type 1. So I'm definitely keeping an eye on what they will share, but we don't have any more detail than probably what you have already come across.
Okay, thank you.
So we probably have time for one or maybe two more questions. And I'm very conscious of the hour, but also that Anne did this presentation in French the hour before. So she has literally been speaking in two languages for 2 straight hours. So I don't want to keep her past 9, but we did have any other questions that you remember now. If not, we put the research email in the chat. If you think of something tomorrow, or even the next day or next few days, or there's more information you want, please don't hesitate to send us an email and we'll provide you with whatever information that we have. We are recording this, so we'll put it up on YouTube. It'll be sent out to you at some point tomorrow afternoon as well. But if we did have one last question, now is your chance to ask it. Otherwise, send us an email later. Also, let us know other topics that you'd like to hear. We definitely have heard about DIY looping loud and clear. That has come through tonight.
Yeah,
So
we'll add that. We'll add that for this year sometime, Ruth.
Yeah, to the list. And if there's anything else you'd like us to get more information on and bring to you, just please let us know and we'll do our best. But if we don't have anything else for tonight, then I would like to thank Anne again for putting these together, for doing them in French and in English, and bringing. We do want, Christine, on the disability tax credit. It is on our YouTube channel. I am going to, where are you, Christine? I'm going to send you my email. Email me, I'll send you the link.
Yeah, there was an updated one, I think, a couple of months ago with the new process.
Yeah, we did it in October. So I'll send you that YouTube link tomorrow, Christine, if you send me an email. And yes, just thank you again so much, Anne. We appreciate you making this very complex subject very accessible to everybody and really explaining it in a way that makes it understandable and helps us all learn a lot about all the very exciting things that are going on right here in Canada when it comes to type 1 diabetes research. So thank you everyone for coming tonight. Thank you again, Anne. And we'll
welcome.
see you hopefully in March when we talk about clinical trials, and we'll take you through the clinical trial finder tool then as well.
Thank you, everybody. Have a good night.